Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen and enjoy my stories every day. I remember the exact moment it hit me. It wasn't some grand gesture or confrontation, but a quiet, almost innocuous change in her behavior. Emily, my wife of 15 years, had always been a creature of habit. We both were. Our lives were structured, predictable. The kind of routine that gives you comfort and a sense of security. I would get up, grab a coffee, go to work. She would stay home, get the kids ready for school, and handle everything on the domestic front. It wasn't glamorous, but it was our life, and I had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. But then something started to shift. It wasn't anything huge at first, just little things. Her phone, for example. She'd always had it nearby, but now it was like a lifeline. It came with her everywhere, into the bathroom, to the dinner table, even when we were in bed. I remember lying there one night, my back to her as she stared at her screen, her fingers flying over the keys, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. At first, I tried to brush it off. She'd always been somewhat attached to her phone, just like everyone else in the modern world. But it wasn't just the phone. It was the way she became so distant. She'd get home late from work, hours later than usual. Sometimes, she wouldn't even tell me what had kept her so late. The kids would ask her where she'd been, and she'd just wave it off with some excuse about a meeting or extra paperwork. But I knew her better than that. Emily didn't work that hard. Her job was demanding, sure, but not like this. Not to the point where she'd suddenly become a stranger in our own home. The first time I thought maybe I was just imagining things was when I caught her deleting messages. She'd been sitting on the couch, her phone resting on the coffee table. I walked by, and without even thinking, I glanced at the screen. She quickly grabbed it, shielding it from my view, but I caught a glimpse of something that made my stomach drop. There, on the screen, was a name I didn't recognize. Nick. I'd never heard that name before. In all the years we'd been together, I'd never known her to mention a Nick. I knew all her coworkers. Hell, I'd even met most of them. But this guy? No clue. My heart began to race, but I pushed the thought away. It was probably nothing, right? Maybe she had a new colleague. Or maybe it was just someone from work who wasn't really important. But the moment passed, and for the next few days, I tried not to obsess over it. However, that fleeting moment lingered in my mind. It ate away at me slowly, like a slow-burning fuse. And as I noticed her continuing to act distant, sneaking off to text in private, staying late at work, something inside me snapped. I decided to look closer. I couldn't explain why I didn't confront her then and there. Maybe it was because I wasn't ready to face the truth. Or maybe I just didn't want to believe it. But I had to know for sure. So, I started paying more attention, watching her movements, noticing every little change in her behavior. I wasn't a paranoid man. I was rational. I trusted her, but that trust was beginning to fray. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I waited until she was in the kitchen, her back turned, and I reached for her phone. I knew I shouldn't, but the temptation was too much. I had to see for myself. I told myself I was just going to take a quick glance, just enough to confirm that everything was fine. I unlocked the phone. It wasn't hard. She had never bothered to change her passcode, and the phone was always left lying around carelessly. What I saw made my blood run cold. The messages weren't just friendly exchanges. They were personal, intimate. The kind of messages that made your stomach churn when you realized they weren't meant for your eyes. Can't wait to see you tonight. I miss you so much. Let's make it special this time. There were photos too. Pictures of her, dressed in ways I hadn't seen her in for years, posing in ways that felt unfamiliar. The worst part wasn't the messages themselves, it was the tone, the comfort, the affection that was flowing freely between them. And that's when it hit me. Emily wasn't just working late. She wasn't just being distracted by work. She was seeing someone else. Nick wasn't just a colleague. He was the other man. The world seemed to freeze for a moment, and I could feel the air in the room get thinner. I wanted to scream, to rage, to confront her then and there. But instead, I just stood there, holding her phone, staring at the evidence. How long had this been going on? How many times had I ignored the signs, trusted her when I should have questioned her? All these years of marriage, and now I realized I had been living in a house of cards. I didn't know what to do. I was angry. Furious, in fact. But I wasn't going to let her see that just yet. No, I needed to think. I needed a plan. There was no way I was going to let this go unanswered. I put the phone back where I'd found it and walked away. But as I did, I could feel the rage building inside me, slowly turning into something darker, something colder. This wasn't going to be just about confronting her. This was going to be about something much bigger. And when the time came, she would regret making me question everything. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to make her feel the consequences of her betrayal. But for now, I would wait. I would let her think she was getting away with it. She had no idea what was coming. The hardest part was the waiting. I spent the next few days walking around in a fog, my thoughts constantly circling back to what I'd discovered. Each time I saw Emily, it was like I was looking at a stranger. She was still my wife, still the woman I had spent years with, built a life with, and shared everything with. But now, every smile, every glance, felt hollow, like it was all a mask she had worn to cover up the truth. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I couldn't. If I had, the truth would have come rushing out, and I wasn't ready for that. I needed to be smart about this. I had to control my emotions. I had to wait for the right moment, the one where she couldn't talk her way out of it, the one where I would have all the power. Every night, as I lay next to her in bed, I could feel the distance between us growing. She'd roll over, phone in hand, texting Nick in some secret corner of the virtual world. The silence in our room wasn't comforting anymore. It felt suffocating. And the anger inside me grew heavier with each passing minute. But I had to stay calm. I had to stay patient. Emily, for her part, acted like nothing had changed. She still came home late from work, still showered me with her usual affection. But it felt like it was all a performance. I saw through it now, the rehearsed gestures, the forced smiles. I wasn't an idiot. I wasn't going to fall for it again. Not after what I had learned. She had a secret life, one that didn't involve me, and I was done being a part of her lie. I kept my distance, and when she wasn't around, I did my homework. I had to be thorough. This wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about making sure I had every detail, every piece of evidence, and making her feel the full weight of her betrayal. I needed leverage, and I wasn't going to give her the chance to worm her way out of this. One afternoon, while she was out running errands, I sat down at my computer and started digging into everything. I searched through old emails, receipts, even her social media accounts. I found things I hadn't expected. A few years ago, she'd gone on a business trip with a coworker, one I knew, but hadn't thought much about. It was the same coworker who, after all these years, I had finally realized was just another piece of the puzzle. The way she described their trip, how close they had become during their time together, sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just Nick now. It was all the little affairs I'd never suspected. I wasn't just going to sit back and let her keep me in the dark any longer. I had to act. I needed to know more about this Nick. How serious was it? Was he just a fling, or was he the real deal? So, I did what anyone would do when they wanted to know the truth. I did some digging. I found his full name on one of her messages, and it didn't take long for me to track him down. I learned about his job, his background, his social media accounts, everything. It was all right there for me to find. I could feel my blood pressure rising with each new piece of information. Nick was not some random guy. He was deeply embedded in her life. The kind of guy who had a place in her world. And that made me see red. The worst part, though. The worst part was realizing how much she had hidden from me. I had trusted her. I had always trusted her. But now, every, "I love you," every, "I'm sorry," every time she told me she needed time to herself, it was all part of the act. One night, after another quiet dinner where she tried and failed to pretend everything was normal, I found myself staring at her. She was talking about a work project, about some new team member she had to train, but my mind wasn't on the conversation. It was on the fact that she had been lying to me for so long, and now I was just a spectator in my own life. "Are you listening?" she asked, snapping me out of my thoughts. Yeah, of course," I said, forcing a smile. It was the same routine, pretend everything was fine while the world was falling apart around me. I wasn't sure how long I could keep it up. How long I could keep pretending. But I did it, because I knew it would make the reveal all the sweeter. I wasn't going to show my cards. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing I had figured it out. No, this was a chess game, and I was playing to win. One afternoon, after work, I decided to take a walk. It was something I'd started doing more frequently, just to clear my mind. But I wasn't really walking for peace of mind. I was walking with a plan. I drove past the coffee shop where I knew Nick worked. Emily had mentioned it a few times. Nick was a barista, she'd said, never going into too much detail. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. Now, though, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Was this the place where they met? Was this their hiding spot? As I drove by, I saw him. He was standing outside the shop, laughing with a couple of people, his phone in hand. It was him. Nick. He was just as I had imagined, confident, laid back, the kind of guy who didn't care about boundaries. The kind of guy who would have no problem sleeping with someone else's wife. I didn't approach him. I just drove past, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly I thought my knuckles might break. Seeing him in person, out there in the world like he was just another guy, made everything feel even more real. It wasn't some secret anymore. It wasn't something I could just pretend wasn't happening. This was my reality now, and I had to face it. That night, as Emily sat next to me on the couch, I watched her laugh at something on her phone, completely unaware that I knew everything. She glanced at me once, and I forced a smile, even though every fiber of my being wanted to scream at her. But not yet. Not yet. I wasn't going to confront her until I had everything in place. I wasn't going to make any rash decisions. The moment would come. It had to. And when it did, she would realize exactly what she had done. The days after my quiet observation of Nick seemed to stretch on forever. Each day, Emily acted like everything was normal, like nothing had changed, like I wasn't walking around with the truth burning a hole in my chest. It was all a game to her, I could tell. But I was smarter than that. I had learned from the past. If there was one thing I knew, it was that people reveal themselves when they think no one is watching. I continued to play my part, to act like the dutiful husband. I went to work, came home, made small talk, and even smiled when she kissed me on the cheek before heading out to meet a friend or go to a late meeting at work. I knew where she was going, she was meeting Nick. I became a master of silence. Every time she lied to my face, I swallowed my fury and carried on with my day. I needed to keep my cool. I needed to make sure I had everything lined up before I made my move. I didn't just want to confront her, I wanted to destroy her carefully constructed world. In the meantime, I continued gathering evidence. I'd accessed her work email, dug deeper into her phone, and even learned Nick's phone number. The more I found, the clearer it became. This wasn't a fleeting affair or a one-time mistake. No, this was a full-blown relationship. There were plans to get away for weekends, messages filled with intimate details, and things that no one who was supposedly just a colleague would say to another person. I had everything. But one night, the pressure of it all finally got to me. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. The frustration of knowing something she didn't think I knew had reached its breaking point. I needed to do something, anything, to make it real, to make her understand that I wasn't just some fool. I had a plan. It was a Thursday night, and Emily had just told me she was staying late at the office to finish some paperwork. She kissed me lightly on the cheek, told me to have a good night, and left, just like she did every time. But this time, I wasn't going to just sit around waiting for her to come home. I waited an hour after she left, just to make sure she was gone. Then, I grabbed my keys and went to the garage. I didn't drive, though. No, that would be too obvious. I walked. I needed some space to think, and I needed to keep my distance from her, from everything. I didn't want to be caught in the act of anything. My destination was the small cafe where Emily and Nick sometimes met up after work. It wasn't far from our house, just a few blocks down the street, but I still needed to be careful. As I walked there, I could feel my heart beating faster, and I felt a strange calmness settling over me. I wasn't angry anymore, I was determined. I was done being lied to. When I reached the cafe, I stood across the street and watched through the window. There they were, sitting in the corner booth, laughing, leaning into each other like the rest of the world didn't exist. My stomach twisted, but I didn't flinch. No, this was exactly what I had expected to see. The betrayal, right in front of me. And yet, something about it still felt like a punch to the gut. I wanted to go in, to tear into them, to scream. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I just stood there, watching them. Emily's face lit up every time Nick touched her hand or whispered something in her ear. That smile, the one that used to be mine to see, was now reserved for him. I couldn't help but wonder how many times they had shared that smile, how many nights they'd spent together while I was left in the dark. It wasn't just the affair that hurt me, though. It was the thought that Emily had been living a double life, lying to my face for so long. She didn't even think I would find out. She didn't think I would look. The anger that had simmered inside me for weeks finally reached its boiling point. I turned and walked away from the cafe, my mind working at full speed. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. No, if she thought she could just waltz away with this secret life, she was gravely mistaken. By the time I got home, I was cold, calculating. I had seen enough. I didn't need to follow her anymore, to dig deeper. I already had what I needed. I knew what I had to do. When Emily finally walked through the door, she was all smiles, like nothing had happened. She didn't even notice the tension in the air, how different the house felt. How heavy the silence was. "How was your night?" she asked, placing her purse on the counter. "Same as usual," I replied, trying to keep my voice level, to mask the storm that was brewing inside me. "Did you get everything done?" She smiled and nodded. "Yeah. It was a long day, but I finished up most of the work." I watched her as she went about her routine, taking off her coat, checking her phone, acting like everything was fine. She had no idea that I was about to turn everything upside down. No idea that I had seen the truth with my own eyes. I couldn't just keep playing the role of the oblivious husband. It was time for the confrontation. But not in the way she expected. I wasn't going to make her feel guilty with tearful accusations. No, I was going to hit her where it would hurt most. I would make her feel the weight of everything she had done. I walked over to the counter where I'd placed a folder earlier that day, my evidence. I could feel her eyes on me as I flipped it open. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm but with a sharp edge. She froze, her face going pale. "About what?" she asked, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. I didn't say anything right away. Instead, I slid the folder across the table toward her. Take a look. It's all in there. Her face went from confusion to dread as she began to flip through the pages. The text messages. The photos. The receipts. Everything. She didn't even try to defend herself. She didn't even try to lie. She started, but no words came out. You thought I didn't know, didn't you? I said, my voice low and steady. You thought you could keep this from me. Keep us a secret. But here we are. She sat back, her hands shaking as she stared at the evidence. And for the first time in months, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't rehearsed. Fear. Real, genuine fear. I'm sorry, she whispered, but the apology felt hollow. It was too late for apologies. There was nothing she could say to fix what had been broken. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear her excuses or her explanations. She'd made her choice, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. You can keep your apology, I said, my voice cold. I'm done. I watched her for a moment, letting the weight of what she had done settle into the silence between us. This wasn't about fixing anything anymore. It wasn't even about saving what was left of our marriage. It was about justice. It was about making her feel the weight of her betrayal. And in that moment, I knew, she wasn't getting away with it. Not this time. The days following that confrontation were a blur. Emily tried, at first, to explain herself. She cried, she apologized, but her words felt empty, just another round of rehearsed lines she thought might convince me to stay. But it wasn't just the affair that broke me, it was the betrayal of trust, the sheer audacity with which she had played me for a fool for so long. I was done. The finality of it settled over us like a storm cloud. Emily moved out within a few days. She left behind her things, but what she couldn't leave was the knowledge that everything we had shared, everything we had built together, had been a lie. I didn't care about her stuff. I didn't care about the house. I cared about the man I had become in the wake of it all. Nick, of course, was nowhere to be found. I didn't need to chase him down. I wasn't interested in taking vengeance on the other man anymore. What was the point? Emily was the one who had broken me. Nick was just a footnote in this sordid story. I couldn't remember the last time I felt so numb. The first few days after Emily left were filled with silence, long hours where I walked through our empty home, trying to hold on to some semblance of what was real. It was like I was a stranger in my own life. My friends had all tried to be supportive, but none of them really understood what I was going through. How could they? How could anyone understand the pain of realizing that the person you loved, the person you trusted more than anyone in the world, had been lying to you for years? I threw myself into work. It was the only thing that kept me sane. And, eventually, I started to rebuild some kind of normalcy. I took up new hobbies, started working out again, things that I hadn't done in years. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the gnawing feeling in my gut never quite went away. Then, nearly a month after the separation, something unexpected happened. It was late one evening when I got a phone call from an unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it, but for some reason, I answered. Hello. I said, bracing myself for another call from Emily or one of her lawyers. A voice on the other end made my stomach drop. Is this Jason? Jason Miller? I froze. Yes, who is this? This is Detective Lisa Clark. I need to speak with you. It's about your wife, Emily. My heart started pounding. What? What about her? There was a brief pause before the detective spoke again, her voice steady but with an edge of urgency. We have some new developments. I need you to come down to the station. I could barely process what she was saying. Why? What's going on? You'll need to come in, Mr. Miller. It's about her death. I felt the world tilt on its axis. Her death? I repeated, dumbfounded. Yes. I'm sorry to inform you, but we found her body early this morning. I couldn't breathe. The phone slipped from my hand, landing with a dull thud against the hardwood floor. My knees buckled, and I sank to the ground. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. I had just gotten out of a marriage that had turned into a nightmare, and now she was dead. After what felt like an eternity, I finally gathered the strength to speak again. Are you sure it's her? It could be a mistake, right? I'm afraid not, the detective said softly. We have her identification, and we're still piecing together the details, but she was found in an alleyway behind a bar on the east side of town. There are some indications that it wasn't an accident. I felt the room spin around me. How? How did it happen? We're not sure yet, she said. But we're investigating. It's a complicated case. I didn't know what to feel. I wanted to scream, to cry, to ask a million questions, but nothing made sense. Emily, the woman who had betrayed me so completely, was dead. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went to the police station, answered their questions, and tried to piece together what had happened. They told me that she had been found with multiple bruises, but no obvious cause of death. The detectives were treating it like a homicide, but they had few leads to go on. No one seemed to know what had happened in the hours leading up to her death. I couldn't stop going over the details, trying to figure out how it all fit together. She had left me for Nick, but she had clearly been living a chaotic life, one filled with secrets I couldn't even imagine. Then, a week later, I received an envelope at my door. It was an official-looking package from the police department. Inside, there was a letter and a flash drive. The letter was brief, stating that they had gathered new evidence in Emily's case, and they wanted me to watch the video on the drive before discussing anything further. With shaking hands, I inserted the drive into my laptop and hit play. The video was from a security camera at the bar near where Emily's body had been found. At first, it showed nothing unusual, just a regular night, people coming and going. But then, around midnight, a figure entered the frame. It was Emily. She was walking alone, but she looked different, disheveled, her hair a mess, her face drawn. She approached a man standing near the entrance of the bar. He was tall, wearing a jacket, and his face was obscured by a hood. They spoke for a moment, and then, as the video continued, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. The man was Nick. The man she had been seeing behind my back. The man who had been the focus of all my rage. I watched as they argued, words inaudible but their body language telling me everything I needed to know. They got closer, and the situation seemed to escalate. Emily looked frantic, shaking her head, trying to push him away. Then, Nick grabbed her arm, pulled her into the alley, and the screen went dark. The video ended abruptly. I sat there, frozen, the weight of what I had just seen crashing down on me. Nick hadn't just been her lover. He had been something much darker. Someone who had destroyed her, in ways I hadn't even realized. I felt sick. A wave of guilt and rage washed over me, but it wasn't directed at Emily anymore. It was directed at Nick, the man who had played with both of our lives, the one who had ultimately pulled her into a place where everything unraveled. The surprise of it all hit me harder than anything Emily had ever done. All the rage I had felt toward her suddenly felt misplaced, like I had been so focused on the wrong betrayal. She had been a victim too, trapped in a situation that no one had seen coming. I wanted justice, not just for Emily, but for myself. But I wasn't sure what that would look like anymore. In the end, the truth I thought I knew about my marriage and my life was nothing but a web of lies, and even though she was gone, the pain was still with me. I'd never truly have the answers. The only thing I could do was move forward, trying to make sense of it all in a world that suddenly felt much less certain than it had before. The ending to my story wasn't the one I had expected. But sometimes, the truth is more complicated than revenge, and even when you think you've uncovered everything, life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it.